Nobody warned him. That is the part that stays with you when you sit with this story long enough. Nobody pulled him aside. Nobody slid a note under his door. Nobody left an anonymous message. The man went to work, came home, kissed his wife, and built his company, and every single person who had a reason to warn him either did not know enough or did not say enough. And on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in October, he found out the truth the only way the truth was ever going to reach him, by accident. By sitting 3 feet away from a woman who had spent 3 years planning to put him in the ground, while she made a phone call and forgot, for the last time, to check who was driving. His name was Deveraux Cole. And if you have never heard that name before, it is because Deveraux Cole spent his entire life being exactly as private as a man of his wealth can afford to be, which is to say, very. He did not court attention. He did not give interviews. He did not have a verified social media presence or a publicist whose job it was to make him look interesting. He was the kind of man whose name you found at the bottom of a Forbes list, in a font smaller than the names above it, because the names above it belonged to men who needed the recognition. Deveraux Cole did not need it. He had $4 billion and a code he had carried since childhood: build quietly, hold steady, and never let anyone see you working. He was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in 1974, the oldest child of a construction foreman named James Cole Sr. and a county hospital nurse named Aretha, who worked double shifts for 31 years and never once complained where her children could hear her. The house they grew up in had 2 bedrooms and a back porch that leaned slightly to the left because James never quite had the free weekend to fix it. They were not the poorest family in the neighborhood. But they lived in the permanent low hum of not enough, the kind of financial weather that does not announce itself as poverty but simply never lets you fully exhale. Deveraux felt that hum from the time he was old enough to understand what the conversations at the kitchen table were actually about. And he made a decision, private, unspoken, the kind a child makes in the middle of the night when nobody is watching, that he would not live inside that hum forever. He graduated from Southern University in 1996 with a business degree and a minor in finance and a clarity of purpose that most people twice his age had not yet found. He worked 3 jobs in his first year out of school. He slept 5 hours a night. He saved. He studied. And by the time he was 26, he had a partner, a man named Quentin Reeves, his college roommate, the only person outside his family he trusted without reservation, and a small private equity consulting firm they ran out of a 2-room office in downtown Atlanta with second-hand furniture and a coffee machine that only worked if you hit it on the left side. Cole Reeves Capital. It was nothing. And then, by degrees that felt slow while they were happening and look extraordinary in retrospect, it was something. And then it was everything. By the time Deveraux Cole was 44 years old, Deveraux Holdings, the company Cole Reeves Capital had grown into, was a private equity and real estate investment group with holdings in 14 states, operations across 4 countries, and a portfolio valued at just over $4 billion. He had an office on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta with his name on the door. He had a brother named Corbett, 8 years younger, who had come up through the company and become his most trusted partner and his COO. He had a reputation in the Atlanta business community that money alone cannot manufacture, the reputation of a man who keeps his word, remembers names, shows up, and means it. People like Deveraux Cole in the specific, uncommon way that people like someone they also respect. He was, by any reasonable measure, a man who had made it. All the way from the leaning back porch in Baton Rouge to the 42nd floor. All the way. And then, in the spring of 2011, at a fundraising gala for a children's literacy nonprofit in Atlanta, he met a woman named Selene Voss. And the compass that had never once pointed him wrong in 37 years of building things stopped working. Selene Yvette Voss was 31 years old when she walked into that gala. She had a finance degree from Georgetown, where she had graduated with honors. She had spent 5 years at a boutique investment firm in Washington, D.C. before relocating to Atlanta in 2009 under circumstances that she described to people who asked as a desire for a change of pace, and that no one ever examined closely enough to verify. She was the kind of woman who managed a room without appearing to manage it. She listened in a way that felt like complete attention but was also, always, a form of assessment. She was not performing warmth, she had genuine warmth, or something precise enough in its imitation that no one in her orbit ever successfully distinguished it from the real thing. Including Deveraux Cole, who had spent 25 years reading people for a living. They spoke for 4 hours at that gala. Deveraux told Quentin Reeves the next morning that he had not planned to stay more than 45 minutes. He said there was something about the way she engaged with an argument. She did not defer, she did not flatter, she pushed back with a directness that he found both unusual and irresistible. In a world full of people who agreed with Deveraux because agreeing with Deveraux was professionally useful, Selene Voss told him twice in one evening that she thought he was wrong. And she was right both times. He said he had never enjoyed being wrong so much in his life. They exchanged numbers. They had dinner the following week. And within 14 months, Deveraux, who had built a $4 billion company on the principle of never moving without full information, proposed to a woman he had known for a little over a year. He slid a ring across the table on a Tuesday evening on his back porch in Buckhead. She held it in her hand for a long moment. He took that pause as the weight of love. He would not understand until years later what she was actually doing in that pause. She put the ring on. They married in June of 2012. The first 2 years looked like a fairy tale, which is to say they looked like what two intelligent people who are performing a fairy tale look like when one of them has the resources to make it convincing and the other has the skill. They traveled. They attended events. They were photographed together at charity galas and industry dinners with the easy comfort of a couple who have figured each other out and like what they found. Selene stepped away from professional work entirely after the marriage. She told Deveraux she wanted to be present. To manage the personal life, the social calendar, the things that kept slipping through the cracks while he was building. He appreciated it. It felt like partnership. It felt like the specific division of effort between two adults who trust each other completely. And so he traveled. And built. And trusted. And in the room he left behind when he got on each plane, Selene got to work. What Selene was doing in those first years, what federal investigators would spend months painstakingly reconstructing from financial records, deleted communications, and the testimony of people who had been peripheral witnesses to it, was learning. She was learning the architecture of Deveraux Holdings the way an engineer learns a structure before deciding where to place the pressure. She attended board dinners and charity events and sat beside her husband while powerful men spoke freely in her presence, because she was the wife, and the wife was furniture. She absorbed it all. She built an understanding of the company's structure, its asset configuration, its legal arrangements, the specific estate documents that governed what would happen to Deveraux Holdings if Deveraux stopped being alive. That was, by the time she was done with it, more complete than what most mid-level executives inside the company could have produced. Corbett Cole, Deveraux's brother and COO, said later that he had concerns from early in the marriage. Not accusations. Not evidence. Just an awareness, the kind that lives below language, that something did not add up. He said Selene asked questions that a wife in love does not typically ask. Questions about asset structure, about signatory authority, about what circumstances triggered what transfers. He raised it with Deveraux once. Gently. Deveraux told him he was reading too much into a woman who was simply intelligent and interested in her husband's world. Corbett dropped it. He would spend years thinking about that conversation. It was in the third year of the marriage that Selene made contact with a man named Terrance Gibbs. She met him at an industry conference in Miami, an event Deveraux had not attended, a detail that would later seem less coincidental than it appeared. Terrance Alvin Gibbs was 42 years old, a former senior partner at a competing private equity firm who had been quietly forced out following an internal investigation into financial misconduct. The matter had been settled confidentially. There were no public charges. There was a non-disclosure agreement that sealed the details on both sides and left Terrance Gibbs with his reputation intact on paper and his resentment fully operational underneath it. He was charming. He was well-dressed. He understood money and power and the specific bitterness of having been close to both and losing the grip. He and Selene, from almost the first conversation, recognized in each other what they were. What they were was two people who had made a calculation. Selene had married into access but not control. Terrance had once controlled things and wanted that back. Together, they began building a plan. Not quickly. Not carelessly. With the kind of patience that is only possible in people who have made a long-term commitment to a particular outcome and are willing to live inside the performance required to reach it. Over the following 31 months during which Selene Cole sat across from her husband at dinner and smiled, and traveled with him, and attended events on his arm, and appeared in every photograph exactly as she intended to appear, she and Terrance constructed the infrastructure of what investigators would later call one of the most premeditated financial conspiracy cases the Atlanta Federal District had processed in a decade. 3 offshore accounts. 3 jurisdictions. A shell company incorporated under Selene's maiden name. A shadow portfolio that mirrored the most valuable components of Deveraux Holdings. Legal language quietly inserted into estate documents through a private attorney Selene had retained without her husband's knowledge, language that, under specific circumstances, would give her controlling interest in Deveraux Holdings upon his death. And a timeline. A documented, confirmed, locked timeline for everything that needed to happen once Deveraux Cole was no longer alive. The transfer of the estate. Terrance's installation as a controlling authority through the restructuring of the board. The cash-out. The disappearance. 2 new names. A different continent. $4 billion. The plan was complete. The machine was built. The only thing left was the men. Terrance had arranged a contact. The kind of contact who does not leave a name on paper. The kind of arrangement that lives only in encrypted messages that both parties believe will be deleted. The method had been decided. The timing had been agreed. 10 days from the delivery of a set of physical documents, authorization codes and transfer agreements that represented the final legal mechanism of the plan, everything would be set in motion. Those documents were in a safety deposit box at a private financial institution in downtown Atlanta. Selene needed to retrieve them. She needed to deliver them to Terrance. And she needed to do it on an ordinary Thursday afternoon while her husband believed she was at a personal training appointment. So she opened a rideshare app. She requested a car. She looked at the rating, 4.8 stars, and she waited. She did not know, she had no reason to suspect, that 3 weeks before that Thursday, Deveraux Cole's personal accountant had flagged a discrepancy in the company's books. A consulting retainer paid to a company no one at Deveraux Holdings had ever authorized. Deveraux brought it to Corbett in confidence. Corbett found 2 more. They ran the numbers together, carefully, off the books, and what they found pointed not to a rogue employee, not to a cyber intrusion, but to a pattern of access that Corbett could barely bring himself to say out loud when he first traced it all the way home. Deveraux did not confront Selene. He was not ready. He needed something that could not be denied or explained away in a courtroom. He needed her, in her own words, to hand it to him. He had a feeling that she was about to make a move. He just needed to be in the room when she did. Corbett registered the rideshare account under a false name. They used a car that had no connection to Deveraux in any database. A recording device the size of a thumb drive was attached to the sun visor 3 hours before the pickup. It was legal. Georgia operates under a one-party consent statute, which means that Deveraux Cole, as a participant in any conversation that occurred in that vehicle, had the full legal right to record it. Everything was ready. And on the afternoon of October 19th, Deveraux Cole pulled on a jacket he had not worn in 20 years, tugged a plain cap low over his face, and drove to his own home address to pick up his wife. She came out of the front door, looked at her phone, glanced at the car, and got in the back seat without once looking at the driver. She was already on the phone before the door closed. He pulled away from the curb. He adjusted his posture to the loose, anonymous ease of a man who does this for a living and has no particular investment in any of it. He turned the radio to something low and forgettable. And he listened. The early part of the call was enough. She was speaking with Terrance. The language was partly coded. They had clearly rehearsed a kind of shorthand for conversations that might be overheard out of context, but Deveraux Cole had spent 25 years decoding the language of high-stakes negotiations, and the architecture of what he was hearing was not opaque to him. She had the documents. The timeline was confirmed. She spoke with the efficiency of someone running through a checklist they have reviewed so many times it has become automatic. And then the call shifted. There was a pause on Terrance's end, the space where a question had been asked, and Selene's voice dropped half a register. Not out of emotion. Out of the particular precision of someone who wants to be completely understood. And she said, in a voice that Deveraux Cole had once heard speak wedding vows in a church in Atlanta in front of 200 people, he has no idea. He never did. He trusted me with everything and I let him. That was always the strategy, Terrance. That was the whole strategy. You use what people give you. The car was stopped at a red light. Deveraux Cole's hands did not move. The knuckle above his wedding ring went white. His jaw set. And he stayed absolutely still. She kept talking. She confirmed the offshore accounts by name, 3 of them, with routing details that Deveraux's attorneys would use to freeze every one of them within 22 hours. She confirmed the timeline, 10 days from delivery of the documents. She referenced the arrangement for the final step, not by name, not with specifics, but clearly enough that any prosecutor hearing the recording would understand precisely what she meant. She talked about what came after. Terrance's role. The restructuring. The new entity. The exit. She talked about it with the confidence of a person who has already won. And then she said, nearly to herself, as the conversation was winding down, I am tired of performing. After this, I am done performing. The call ended. The car went quiet. The recording device kept blinking its small red light on the sun visor. 6 minutes later, Deveraux Cole pulled up to the address she had entered into the app. A discreet building. She gathered her bag. She got out without looking at the driver. She walked through a glass door and was gone. Deveraux sat at that curb for 4 minutes without moving. He did not start crying. He did not call anyone. He sat with the full weight of what he had just heard distributing itself through every part of him, finding the places where it would settle, and burn, and harden. 12 years. Every dinner, every trip, every photograph, every moment he believed was real, reorganizing itself in his mind according to a completely different set of facts. And then he picked up his phone and made 2 calls. First to his attorney. Then to the former federal prosecutor he had hired as a private investigator 6 weeks earlier when the first discrepancy appeared in the books. He said to each of them the same 4 words, I have it all. What happened in the next 48 hours was not rage. It was the application of extraordinary discipline to an extraordinary circumstance, executed by a man who understood that the difference between winning and losing is almost always a question of patience and sequencing. The recording was immediately transferred to 3 separate legal custodians and time-stamped. The routing numbers Selene had spoken aloud in the back seat were submitted to financial investigators the same evening. Within 22 hours, preservation orders had been issued on all 3 offshore accounts, with a 4th identified through cross-referencing the shell company. $42 million in assets, accumulated through unauthorized transfers over approximately 3 years, was frozen before either Selene or Terrance had any idea the walls were closing. Terrance Gibbs realized something was wrong on the morning of October 21 when his access to 2 of the accounts was simultaneously blocked. His attorney received a call. Terrance made several attempts to reach Selene. She did not answer, because by that point she had received her own notification, a preservation notice served on the private attorney she had separately retained, requiring him to hold all client communications. Selene understood immediately what that meant. She went back through everything in her mind. The communications had been encrypted. The document exchange had been in person. The accounts were under names with no obvious connection to her. She had been meticulous. She had been patient. She had spent 3 years making sure there was no thread that could be pulled. She had not accounted for her husband in the front seat of a Honda Civic with a recording device on the sun visor. That night, Deveraux came home. Selene was in the kitchen. He sat down at the table. He did not perform. He poured himself a glass of water, a deliberate choice. Corbett had advised him, do not eat or drink anything she offers until this is completely over. He asked her how her day had been. She said it was fine. He said his was fine too. 2 people in the same kitchen. 12 years of marriage between them. One of them had heard everything, and one of them did not yet know it. And they sat there, in the house he had bought and she had planned to inherit, until it was time to go to bed. And he lay in the dark beside her and said nothing. because there were 18 more hours of legal work to finish before he was ready. And Deveraux Cole did not move before he was ready. On the morning of October 22, Terrance Gibbs was approached by federal investigators outside his apartment complex in Midtown Atlanta. He was asked to come in for a conversation. He agreed, because he believed he still had room to maneuver. That belief lasted approximately 11 minutes, which was when an investigator slid a partial transcript across the table. It was from the taxi recording. It had Terrance's name in it. It had the routing number of one of the accounts. And it contained the phrase "the arrangement through Terrance's contact," in Selene's voice, with a date and timestamp attached. Terrance Gibbs looked at that transcript for a long time. And then he asked for an attorney. And the last architecture of the plan that Selene had spent 3 years constructing began coming apart at the joints. The morning of October 23, Selene came downstairs at 7 in the morning and found her husband sitting at the kitchen table with two people she did not recognize. One was Gerald Okafor, Deveraux's personal attorney of 11 years. The other was a federal agent. Selene stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She looked at the three of them. And she did what she had trained herself to do under pressure: she composed herself. She kept her face completely still. Deveraux looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he reached across the table and pressed play on a small digital recorder. And Selene Cole heard her own voice fill the kitchen of the home she had lived in for 9 years. She heard herself name the accounts. She heard herself confirm the timeline. She heard herself say that Deveraux had trusted her with everything and that she had let him. She heard herself say she was tired of performing. The recording ended. The room was completely quiet. The silence lasted, by his attorney's account, approximately 90 seconds. And then Selene Cole did something that no one present had expected. She did not deny it. She did not reach for an explanation. She looked directly at her husband, the first time she had looked directly at him since walking downstairs, and she asked, in a voice that was completely controlled, "How long have you known?" And Deveraux Cole said, "Long enough. But I needed to hear it from you." And then he stood up. And he walked to the back porch. And he stood there, looking out at the yard where he had proposed to her, and he let himself feel it. Not the anger. Not the calculation of what came next. Just the weight of what had been taken. 12 years of belief. 12 years of a life he had thought was one thing and had turned out to be something else entirely. He stood there for 20 minutes. And then he went back inside, because the work was not finished. What Deveraux said to Selene before the legal process fully took over is not on record. His attorney has said only that Deveraux chose to speak without the device running, a deliberate choice, he explained, because some things are not meant to be evidence. What Corbett has shared, from what his brother told him afterward, is this: Deveraux told Selene that he had loved her without reservation. That there had never been a version of himself that withheld. He told her that he would not carry hatred for her because hatred would cost him more than it would ever cost her. He told her that the most painful part was not the plan, it was what she had used. His trust. His belief in her. The very specific openness of a man who had decided that love was worth being fully present for. She had taken that and she had built a weapon out of it. And he told her that she would have to live with that. And then he told her that he had already decided he would not. The federal charges were filed 7 weeks after the taxi ride. Conspiracy to commit murder. Conspiracy to commit fraud across multiple jurisdictions. Wire fraud. Money laundering. Terrance Gibbs, facing the stronger end of the evidence and a legal team with no patience for delay, entered plea negotiations within 2 months. He cooperated fully. He provided testimony about the timeline, the method, the contact arranged to execute the final step, and the specific conversations in which Selene had driven every decision from the beginning. His cooperation was comprehensive and, by all prosecutorial accounts, credible. The contact Terrance had arranged, the individual whose name had never appeared on paper, was identified through the information Terrance provided, located, and charged separately. That case resulted in a guilty plea and a sentence of 11 years. Selene Cole's defense team was formidable. They built an argument around the recording being misleading out of context, the financial transfers being authorized, and Terrance Gibbs being a cooperating witness with every incentive to fabricate. It was disciplined. It was exactly the kind of defense you hire when you are facing a serious evidentiary record and need to create doubt. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on 4 of 6 counts. At sentencing, Selene Cole stood before the judge in the same posture she had maintained through the entire trial, composed, still, the performance never fully stopping. She was sentenced to 22 years in a federal facility. She showed no visible emotion. Her attorneys filed for appeal. As of the time this story is being told, that appeal has not been successful. The $42 million in frozen assets was returned to Deveraux Holdings. The shell company was dissolved. The offshore accounts were closed and their contents directed toward restitution. Deveraux Holdings issued a single public statement, measured and final. The company was operationally sound, all legal matters had been addressed through appropriate channels, and the leadership was grateful for the integrity of the systems that had allowed the situation to be resolved without harm to the organization or the people who depended on it. That was all. No press conference. No dramatics. Just a statement from a company that was not going anywhere. Deveraux Cole sold the house in Buckhead 8 months after the trial. He bought something smaller. He took 3 months away from the company, the first extended absence in 20 years, and he drove to Baton Rouge and sat on the back porch of his mother's house. Aretha Cole was in her 70s and still as sharp as she had ever been, and she sat with her son in the evenings while the Louisiana heat rolled off the day, and she listened. Deveraux did not talk much at first. Then he started to. And what he talked about, his mother has shared with family members, was not Selene. It was himself. The places where he had known something was wrong and had overridden it. The specific moments where his instinct had sent a signal and he had chosen to believe what he wanted to believe instead. He said, more than once, sitting on that porch, "I am not going to carry this as something that was done to me. I am going to carry it as something I am going to learn from and then put it down." He went back to work. He restructured several divisions of Deveraux Holdings in ways that strengthened governance and reduced the kind of single-point vulnerabilities that Selene had spent years quietly mapping. He established a foundation in his mother's name, the Aretha Cole Foundation, focused on financial literacy for young people from working-class backgrounds across the South. The kind of foundation that serves the specific hunger he remembered from the kitchen table in Baton Rouge. The kind that teaches young people the language of money before the world has a chance to use that language against them. He has not remarried. In the one long-form interview he gave after the trial, a quiet conversation with a journalist he had known for 15 years, he said that he did not regret having loved Selene the way he did. He said that loving someone completely is not a mistake, even when they turn out to be someone other than who they said they were. The mistake, he said, is refusing to see what is in front of you once it finally becomes clear. He said he would not make that mistake again. At sentencing, Deveraux Cole was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood up in that room, in front of the judge and the attorneys and the people who had followed this case for months, and he did not list what had been taken from him. He did not ask for anything beyond what the law had already provided. He said only this: "I built everything I have from nothing. And none of it transferred. Not the company. Not what is in me. I want to be clear about that. You do not take what a man has built in himself. That part does not transfer." And he sat down. Here is what stays with me when I sit with this story long enough. Deveraux Cole had spent 25 years developing an instinct for people that the people who worked alongside him described almost like a sixth sense. He could read a room. He could sit across a table from someone and know within minutes what that person actually wanted, beneath what they were saying. And yet, for 12 years, he did not see what was in front of him every single day. Not because he was careless. Not because he was foolish. But because there are people disciplined enough, patient enough, and composed enough to operate completely below the threshold of what a trusting person knows to look for. Not every threat arrives loudly. Not every danger has the decency to show up wearing its real face. And the other thing that stays with me is what Deveraux did when the feeling finally came. That quiet, persistent, low-frequency signal that something was wrong. He did not move on emotion. He did not confront. He did not guess. He built the conditions under which the truth could not escape him. He was patient. He was disciplined. He created the container. And then he let the truth come to him. In a borrowed car. In a $6 cab. 3 feet from a woman who had spent 3 years planning his death. He let her hand him every word he needed. And when it was over, he drove her the remaining 6 minutes to her destination in complete silence. Because the work was not finished yet. Because Deveraux did not move before he was ready. And he was almost ready. That quality, that refusal to act before the picture is complete, even when what you are seeing is destroying you in real time, is not something most people have. Most people break. Most people confront before they are ready, or run before they have the full story, or react in the one moment that costs them everything. Deveraux sat with the worst thing he had ever heard and he drove the car. And that is the reason he is on a porch in Baton Rouge and not in the ground somewhere in rural Georgia. The margin between those two outcomes was not luck. It was the discipline of a man who had learned, from a leaning back porch and a mother who worked double shifts and a father who never quite had the free weekend to fix what was broken, that the only thing that truly belongs to you is what you build in yourself. That part does not transfer. He told the court that. He meant every word. Before we go, drop a comment below and let us know where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you have not already hit that subscribe button, do it now. We tell stories like this every single week, stories about what people are truly capable of, stories about what survives, stories that stay with you. You do not want to miss what is coming next. We will see you there.